All right, welcome back, everybody. We're here with another episode of the Off Angle, of course. Doing pretty well, getting the one a week going. We came up with a few ideas for guests, and Djanko answered back, so that was magic. To be fair, just going through the whole roster of talent at the moment, while they're at the events as well. So obviously, a shout out to yourself for getting involved this week. We had Moses a couple of weeks ago as well. In between games, it's busy times. You just said, you've been in Katowice for what, 6-7 weeks now, something like that.
Yeah, this is the final stretch, week number 6 for the road to Rio. It's been 5 weeks of Pro League, so yeah, it's been a long one this time around, but we've been busy at the very least. A lot of games, and it's always exciting when it's anything major related. The high pressure, the stress, right? People choking. Always love to see that. Tears.
Yeah, love to see tears, love to see people choking, but maybe only metaphorically and not physically. And that's where I guess the first topic comes out, doesn't it, Scriv? Doesn't it? So.
Yes, yeah. The big one, I suppose we like a little bit of talk about general news, and you could call it drama. It's a bit of an annoying word these days, isn't it, in the sort of Twitter spheres and all that. But obviously, Konfig got in a fair bit of trouble. You had a bit of banter with it on the stream today, I believe. I caught on Reddit just now. Thanks to Pronogo for telling me about that, of course. I saw a few people on Twitter as well. But yeah, obviously, Konfig, not 100% sure what's happened, but he's gotten into a bit of an altercation. It started off with a bit of information around him being injured, and that was probably going to affect him going to the RMR. And now it seems for the prolonged future that Astralis are, perhaps done with him. So it must have been something relatively serious. And then more info comes out that it's not even, you might guess that it's like some beef that's been boiling behind the scenes with like a heroic player or something like that, some kind of like, I don't know, butting of heads, competition, all that good stuff. Maybe but it seems it's just kind of on a night out while in Malta, some random person, and obviously I don't know how the other person looked, but he's come out pretty worse for wear, not being able to walk, as well as no team now. So there's multiple prongs on that. The first, I suppose, question I'll open to the floor on it, guys. How does something like this come about, right? Like, I don't know. I feel like you've got to be in control of your, especially while you're on the job. You maybe only just finished because, you get knocked out. But all the same, I don't know how you let that frustration boil over and think that it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think, it's just crazy to me. I think I touched on this on the podcast that we did, is like that. For you to think you can get into any sort of a physical altercation in esports, just in general, it's like a bad idea, right? And then you do it like with some random, like in a night out because you were drunk and he probably offended you or whatever it was, whatever the sort of an insult is, you need to like do better. Right, like you just put yourself in a position of any like pro athlete or anyone. Imagine the amount of shit that they get on an everyday basis, right? Like the horrible things that are being said to them on the street. Like someone can see on the street and say, "Hey, you go fuck yourself!" Like, what are you supposed to do? Jump at it or run at him and like kick the shit out of him? I mean, no, right? It just comes with the territory, with being a public persona. Not to speak about. Obviously, if he got into a fight with someone, he wouldn't only be using his legs. Like, I don't know if anyone imagines like that. Like, he was saving his hands and then like trying to kick him around and whatever, right? So at that point, I mean, you're all in. And also, I'm not saying you're not supposed to go out and have fun and everything. And not everything is in your control. Some random drunk people might come at you and, you might run into trouble. But I feel like, 99% of the time you can just walk away, right? Like you can just get out, diffuse the situation and leave, right? Go home, go do whatever, right? And sometimes you're going to feel like a wimp maybe because of it. And, it's going to eat at you. And that's not how you would have handled things maybe. I don't even want to say back home because it doesn't really matter where you are, but just in a sense of, but you have to look at the bigger picture. Like your whole livelihood is dependent on this one thing. And I'm not even talking about necessarily being injured. It's just about you're a liability to your team if you're a loose cannon like that. You can't be relied on. You can't be counted on. And especially for someone like Konfig, who, I don't know how to put this. It's not like too, like has a bit of a reputation. Not for being like anything, like picking fights at every single tournament or anything like that. But just as a bit of a like kind of loose cannon sort of a guy, you probably want to keep it on the down low after everything you've been through and finally getting a chance to play for Astralis and whatnot. You'd probably, it would be a smart thing to do would be to be on your best behavior, and it didn't really sound like it. So unfortunately, it feels like just another wasted opportunity for him, and you have to wonder whether he will get another one. He will, but not on that level. Someone will take a gamble on him, right? And maybe he changes, but maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what did he do? Like, the problem is he's already got a history of being injured on top of this. Right?
And sorry, just one last thing is like some of the guys the talent from Malta and the people who live there did inform the players about like, the areas that you probably don't want to find yourself late in the evening or something like that. Not that you're going to get shot, but it's probably a lot of drunk people going around, and, you might end up in trouble due to no fault of your own. And that's one of the areas that they mentioned where it happened. Paceville, I believe, or something like that.
Okay. So he was already sort of warned off it and then decided maybe after a few drinks at a different bar, who knows what the details are, right? But yeah, the thing is, I just can't believe that this actually has happened. But I also I'm taken aback at the fact that there weren't any, there's apparently no charges have been pressed. I was surprised to hear that he wasn't like cuffed to his, hospital table or wherever he was, you know what I mean? Like wherever he was taken after he broke his ankle is like, how do you get away with that kind of behavior and not, not have charges pressed in that sense, not be like, at least detained in some way? I guess maybe because he had the injuries, that was what was taken care of first. But that's still wild to me. Like the headline on the Jackson article that initially broke this story, which he of course responded to saying mostly BS, which apparently in and of itself was mostly BS. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's all these rumors.
What's
and
the point of that tweet? What are you achieving with mostly BS?
Mostly BS.
Okay, so you are at fault here, basically, is what you're saying.
Basically, yeah. It's like I didn't just break my ankle. I also injured my pinky finger when I punched him in the face. I don't know, whatever the fuck. Like, come on, bro. So that was just silly. But you also have to think about the idea that, like, just reading that as a fan or as somebody who follows Counter-Strike is so surreal. The idea that Astralis set to bench Konfig after fist fight in Malta or whatever the line was. There's something to that effect. It's like, what do you mean he got into a fist fight in Malta? And, to Djanko's point, he does have a reputation of being a little bit more on the testy side. If you guys remember back when he was originally going to be scouted and instead they went with Magisk for the legendary Astralis lineup, one of the things that was cited was his behavior, right? Zonic was not going to tolerate the way that he was behaving, and then he had to go and sort of find himself, so to speak. There was the Thorin article about it. Then he maybe tried to like shape up his behavior a bit. Then we obviously saw him in Complexity, and now we know he's in Astralis. Now we know he's probably not going to be there for much longer either. And it was only about a year that he's been in this roster too. It's not like it was a really, really long tenure. Maybe that length of time will surprise people because time does seem to be moving faster these days. But still crazy to me that to think that his performance in this roster is going to be cut short because he couldn't control his emotions, which is exactly the reason why he was that's why Zonic said, no, you're not going to come into this roster to begin with. Now Zonic's no longer in the team. Konfig gets called up. Now that he's part of Astralis, maybe he's reformed or whatever, and now we get to see that maybe that's not the case. Like that's got to feel really like he's got to be in his own head a lot at this point is all I can think of. It's like, I remember when people were talking about, it's a weird connection to make, but when Nico whiffed the Deagle shot on Simple, on Nuke in their first major final, like that was obviously pretty nuts. Like that was obviously a case where it's like, okay, you got to be in your own head about that. There's no way you're not thinking about that for the following rounds, but also just for like the next week. But like Konfig's is so much more severe, obviously. And it's just like a similar notion that you've really messed this up. And really a lot of this responsibility has to be on you. And it's going to take a long time for you to like recover from that mentally. Maybe he doesn't. Like you said earlier, Djanko, maybe you think somebody's going to take a gamble on him. I don't know if maybe somebody will, but I don't know if he's going to be able to take the gamble on himself. Like, can he right this ship again? Because he already had the injury with Complexity. He parlayed that into an Astralis move. And now he's got another injury, but this time entirely like it's not just an accident, a freak accident in an airport that broke his wrist. It's an intentional decision on his part that broke his ankle, and that's completely different. You know what I mean? So I just feel like this whole situation rather is really fucked up.
Well, I think
I don't know how he recovers.
It's not like, not a big org, not anyone like that, but a mixed team, someone like Gamer Legion, right? Like someone like that, someone who wants some fragging power and doesn't really care about the baggage that he's got.
Do you think he's just going to enter into the same like realm as Smooya to that extent, where he is just part of mixed teams, or there's going to be like a couple of rosters here and there that pick him up for like 3 months and then drop him? Because that's basically what's happening with him. So.
I think that's actually a decent, a pretty good like kind of comparison in terms, like another talented player, but there's just so much stuff. It's not even at some point. This is what these players don't realize. At some point, it doesn't matter whether things are true or not. It's just there's constant noise around you all the time. And you know what that is to a coach? Distraction. And that's exactly what you don't want. It's like, man, I don't, why are you doing this? Why are you making all these tweets in Smooya's case? Oh, I've changed it. I found this. Now my game is going to be, just play the game. Just, and we'll see on the server if you're good or not. I don't care for your explanations, excuses. Why do you have the need to talk so much, right? And obviously, looking back at his like career, so many teams moved on from him at different times because of different reasons, different type of teams as well. That what they say: if it stinks everywhere you go, it's probably
check your own shoes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think to throw a name in, I'd say Apex might be one. To be fair, I know that they're pretty unhappy with the results that they're getting despite their team, and they seem to have money to throw around. So maybe that's just sort of like a quick little idea if they're smartish, and it does seem like everything has been soiled. But just sort of to speak to your point, Djanko, I think that some players. Very few, right? Some players in conventional sports can kind of get away with it, but you also, maybe not to that degree. I think, I'm more thinking like party animals and things like that or whatever, but you still have to be able to perform and deliver, right? And I think that we do have a few players who not only are there kind of personality conflicts, but also not able to kind of bring it on the server. And I think that that's maybe where, I don't know, a config of a few years ago, you could perhaps, especially if it's only the first kind of episode like this, you could maybe overlook it. But I feel for my money that config's been kind of inconsistent and, not quite solid enough on that Astralis lineup to necessarily get over something like this at the top level. It's, simple, and look, esports, but simple is like the classic kind of argument where he's done a lot. We could ream off quite a bit, I'm sure that the three of us have been around for long enough and researched deeply enough that there's plenty of things that you could say about Simple, but he was able to still toe the line, you could argue. And yeah, when it gets physical, I think that's kind of going over the line, really, is what most people would say. And then obviously the fact that, like I'm saying, he was just able to still outperform everyone on the server, still, look good despite his kind of crazy antics, as it were,
But that's because he was able to mature as a person. Like, he would have never been this good if he didn't mature. And I love the Simple story because of that reason, because it's a positive story in the end. It shows you a player who realized what he has in terms of his own talent and realized that his behavior was petty and negative, and that he needs to do better. And that not everyone else around him is going to be better off for it, but he himself too. And that's when he became, the world's best player. And that's when his team started having some success here and there. And obviously, once they made further changes, they became the best team in the world, right? Imagine the stories we would be telling if he didn't do that. How many segments would there be of wasted talent in Simple? And maybe that's Konfig. Maybe Konfig was able to do the same thing. Maybe he would be as good as, I don't know, Nico or someone like that, Yakinda, an aggressive rifler, who's able to do a lot of things. If you mentioned like, sports again and football, maybe look at someone like Balotelli, like he's the typical example of someone who was extremely talented, but a bad boy, not as serious, right, lackadaisical about it. And I think a lot of people will tell you the same thing. Yeah, if he actually tried, he could have been a generational talent potentially, and what's not. And instead you're talking about, well, a guy who was all right here and there, had his moments, but just wasn't serious enough about his craft.
It just makes me think of like, you talk about, does Konfig's story end here? Lurking behind all of this is apparently Astralis and NIP are now entering into later stage discussions about the device transfer. And if you could imagine, like Djanko was talking earlier, it's not just your physical form. Are you going to injure yourself? It's also your team and your reliability. Imagine if Konfig doesn't go out and do this. Not only is he still playing in the RMR, which gives Astralis a better chance to qualify, we would suppose, over an academy player, but also waiting in the wings, Device might be able to slot in for Farlig, and suddenly you have a much better roster on paper. Now, I mean, it's going to be better if Device comes in, but is it going to be as good as a roster if Konfig was still there? No, I mean, not really. Right now, it sounds like maybe Farlig stays on the roster and Device replaces Konfig's empty spot, or what? Like, this whole thing has opened up such a huge can of worms that, like, there's no shot that Astralis can, like, I don't think easily recover from. They already missed the boat on, like, the ex-Copenhagen Flames players, maybe some of the people that were exiting Heroic or whatever. It's like, they missed the boat on all these potential transfers they could have made. Now they're trying to get the prodigal son to return, but they've just lost Konfig, and that doesn't seem like it's going to be a reversible move at all. It seems like it's gone. So.
Low key, I think this is like a great thing for Astralis, and the next great thing that could happen for them is to not qualify for the major, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Because that would give them the perfect excuse to blow this team up because it's not working, right? And for me, also Konfig was always a little bit overrated to me. Like when he's at his peak, like yeah, he's amazing. Like he can win you games maybe by himself, but that's happening so rarely, especially when it comes to playing against top teams. You can't rely on that to win you games, and it's because of him. On the other side, you have Blame, the other edition, who's playing lights out. Like it's he's up there with Nico, Exile, Yekindar is one of the best riflers in the world this year, right? He's having tremendous impact, so he's done his part and he deserves his space. But Glaive had to change a lot of stuff because of the duo of Konfig and Blame coming in, and Glaive is not an anchor. Like he wasn't an anchor player in 2018 when they were the best team in the world. He couldn't have pulled it off. He can't pull it off now. He has to play the rotator role, to use his game sense, to use his reads, and be that sort of an element. If you make him rely on his mechanics, he's gonna get bullied, which is what's happening in a lot of their games. So what you do now is you blow this team up, Device comes in, and you have the core of Glaive, Blame, and Device, and you get two more players. Who it can be? It can be different guys. I don't think they would be able to get anyone from Heroic, thinking Tessis or Shush, to get like a solid anchor there. But you could get potentially Stair and Zyphon from Sprout. Like both are 18 years old. Stair, I watched him in last season of Pro League. He was pretty good even then. Zyphon with Copenhagen Flames obviously has some experience, and they're both playing well right now for Sprout at the moment. So that's and I think for Astralis, I've been in this position with Faze. It's like there's a lot of players who are right there, but you're not sure if you can pull the trigger on them because you want to be a championship team, right? A contender team. You don't have time to for a year for someone to develop, so to speak. If you have players on your team like Nico and Rain and Cold, for example, who are all in their prime, or maybe even a little bit past their prime, and you have to kind of win now, right? By the time this young player develops, your veteran is maybe washed, right? So that's the same for Astralis. Like they don't want to spend 2 years on a lucky, which they realize that they can't do, and so on. But I think at this point you have to take the risk, because I think that was their thought process with some of the Copenhagen Flames guys. Okay, with Roy, it definitely wasn't the age, but it was, is he actually good enough? In our team, could he perform on the same level against tier 1 all the time? And I think they're proving in Fnatic, him and Nicholas, that they can. So I think they're going to have to take some sort of a risk like that. And to be fair, also with Blame and Device, you have a good amount. Like you have your 3 most important things are set: the in-game leader, the opper, and then you have a good experience like lurker / in general just star rifler. So I think that would be a fun Astralis. That would be an exciting Astralis to watch. But I just can't wait if this thing, or actually when this thing happens, the Device comes back to Astralis. Now I can't do it. I'm not that. I don't have that same dedication, right? But to go through all the times that players staff from NIP and Astralis both have denied that this is ever going to be a thing. That is just a stupid rumor that the device is, hoping to go back to Astralis, or that Astralis is not, keeping Lucky because they know a device is going to come back, and so on and so on and so on, right? Because that was so much bullshit was fed to people, and it was so obvious what was the backstory, really.
Yeah, the whole device angle is so funny to me, especially when he was talking about how, like, oh, please, this is legit. There's like an angle to this where you can say this is legit. So just so people know, I'm not just talking shit out of my ass. But the idea that device said, please respect my mental well-being, don't report on these things, and then said something to the effect of, like, this is basically not true. Like, there's no way that I'm going back to Astralis. This is like almost a year ago now, if people don't remember. This is when he was more recent to his time stepping away from NIP. Like, thinking about that tweet or whatever from device, and then now contrasting it with the idea that he will, it seems, inevitably be returning to Astralis, is so crazy for his legacy as like an individual. It, like, less so for his career or whatever, but it's just to think that you would say, I'm not, it's not going to happen. Like, it's not just that Nip and Astralis have maybe said this, like what Djanko was saying. It's Device himself said this. Again, time changes a lot, but the idea that he's going to come out and like say absolutely not, and actually you journalists reporting on this are like, you guys are stepping over the line, and this is the line that, like, you shouldn't cross. You shouldn't be talking about people after they've like taken a mental health leave or whatever. Like, you can think that that's fine and fair to say, but the idea that later on it comes true anyway, and maybe it kind of makes you think maybe there were a few things there that were true about the initial report, that maybe he expressed interest in going back to Astralis, because now it seems like it's what's going to happen. So the idea that you're going to, condemn these journalists for that, especially if you yourself know I am the player and I did say that, and they are correct in their reporting, I'm still going to rake them through the coals and sort of make them lose all semblance of pity in the court of public opinion and all this other stuff. That's messed up, man. So I don't know, man. Like, I hope he's going to be just as good as he was when he was originally back on Astralis, and maybe some of the signs of life that he showed early on in the NIP days. But especially given how his legacy in NIP ended in terms of his like actual individual form, I'm not sure how long it's going to be before he gets back up to speed. Maybe the language thing will help, that they're going to be speaking Danish presumably, but I don't know, man. I'm still not super. I'm not even sure that the device move is going to be a panacea. Like you said, Djanko, I think they do need to blow this team up, and it seems like I don't know if device is going to try to ego trip them or whatever, and say, hey, you guys need better players than this if you want me on or whatever. That could be an angle that they could use to like force the Astralis organization to pull rank or whatever. There was an interview on HLTV with Glaive where he mentioned that sometimes the organization wants to make changes, and you just have to accept it, respect it, do your best to keep your spot earned. So that's like an interesting tidbit that Glaive is giving us about the sort of backroom dealings of Astralis and what's going on with them. Because then it's more like when NIP was just subbing out members of their Academy League team with the main roster. It's like, oh, I guess the organization is doing this. Campus had a similar line. So actually a lot in common between these two organizations. And I'm not even talking about the shady shit they're up to behind the scenes. So great.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, I think it's interesting that in terms of like competitiveness, whatever you want to say about conduct or, interviews and things, it feels like Nip and Astralis are in similar sort of positions where we all maybe feel they should be doing a little bit better, definitely org-wise, but even just in terms of the players that they have. So, yeah, I don't really have like a great deal to add on the whole device stuff because, we've talked about it on this show and it gets talked about an awful lot. It's sort of a recurring segment in the world of CSGO.
Spectre of Counter-Strike. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, eventually, I guess it is going to get answered. And generally speaking, the Jackson outlet has not really been off very often or at all.
Yeah, especially when it comes to Astralis, right?
That's true. That is true, actually.
I mean, we have one of the best players in the world and the most consistent players not play for a full year. At all. And now he's supposed to come. Yeah, I don't think he's gonna miss out on too much. I mean, the game is the game, right? Especially if he comes back to Astralis and plays with Glaive again, right? But I could see a situation in which Astralis might try to leverage a little bit everything and say, I mean, how can we be sure about this and that and blah 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 blah, and this whole thing just, depends how you want to look at it. You look at it from the outside, and it just looks like a guy went to a different team. He goes to NIP, and then all of a sudden he doesn't really like it, how it's there, and he's like, I don't want to play.
Yeah. That's what it looks like. Yeah.
But there's obviously real life issues that led to everything that has happened. And it all depends how you look at it, and if you're one of these orgs, right? Because those things matter, but also at some point, like, fucking life goes on, dude. Like, what are you gonna do now? for how long is this gonna persist? And it was also very strange because that NIP team at the start of this year was actually pretty good, and you're looking at it and you're like, get the fuck Plopsky out of there, and if Device can op, all of a sudden you have a fucking insane team potentially, right? Like, and obviously that didn't happen. Probably, again, he would be unwilling to play even for that sort of a lineup, which would be a little bit strange. But yeah, I guess we will all know very soon.
Indeed we will. But yeah, moving on, right? We could talk about the whole Device situation a fair bit. A conversation I wanted to kind of open up, and obviously, someone of your tenure, having played and observed at one point as well, and of course in more recent when it comes to competitivity, you've coached, right? And for a good extended period, different teams, different lineups, different players, all that good stuff. One of the opening games of the RMR was Faze up against Gamer Legion, and not that many people really expected Gamer Legion to do anything in the entire event, really, right? No offense to them. I speak to some of the analysts and stuff like that. So shout out those guys. But of course, this is a team that comes from quite deep into, if you want to tier things, maybe like tier 3, you would say. They have their ECLs, they have their sort of champions circuit, as it's now called, or whatever. But they end up, going to multiple 3 overtimes in total. It gets away from me when the numbers get all that
4.
high.
It might have been. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah. 4 or
it was
5.
like 28.
Right. Okay.
4.
Well, there you go. But a deep game, a deep run, and a game as well that I think they came back into. Right. Like Faze looked like they were going to take it at one point pretty comfortably, and Gamer Legion managed to indeed turn it around and make it an overtime game. So I kind of wanted to, pose a bit of an open-ended question, but indeed a question to you about how that happens. Because Faze, although kind of shaky, and although, not the best performance or not the performance that they wanted, let's say, from them at Pro League, and we've seen a little bit against Complexity, they drop a map that wasn't really expected. Cloud9 is a tough matchup for them, but they don't even pick up a map there. That's one thing, but this is a team that, is maybe not even in the top 50, I don't think. They might be now that they're, winning these types of games, bringing it close in these types of games. But yeah, I just I'm curious as to how you let it get that close, how there is potential for a team like this that, really should not have a chance at winning it, and indeed they do. Is it down to BO1s? Is it down to burnout, back-to-back tournaments, no respect? What's kind of the angle from, these top-level players? Why does it come down to a game like that?
Well, for me, I think the first problem is, and I said this on the broadcast, I don't think I've ever said this before about FaZe, but I think they botched the veto also in a best of 1, which is pretty difficult. It's like, why do you not veto Mirage and leave it between Ancient and Overpass, right? Like, it's 2 maps that, sure, I don't know where they put them in their own map pool, right? And how they rate them, but for sure, a team like Gamer Legion that is basically a mixed team. I mean, this lineup has only played the RMR qualifiers together, right? Like, they're not gonna have, some great team play on it. And even if they do have some stuff, you will probably be able to read it easily or come up with counters against it, or at least prevent them from winning rounds consecutively. Instead, you go for Mirage, which is something like that, like, the 3 of us and 2 more guys, we could probably come up with like a decent game plan on Mirage, but just by combination that everyone knows all the nades and whatnot, and people are familiar with the map, that everyone's played it 1,000 times individually, right? The timings, the dynamic, like the openings, all these little things, the little moves. So I think they made it like quote unquote easy for Gamer Legion to play, and FaZe still had a pretty good CT side the first half. Then they lose Pistol, Gamer Legion string some rounds together, and that's when you see their confidence go up. And all of a sudden, they're jumping out of window, top cap, on short with the op, finding entries all the time. And, you know, it's not hard to play against any team if you're starting rounds 5v3, 5v4, 4v3 all the time, right? Like, the game becomes simpler. And I don't think Faze even played terribly bad or anything like that. I think Gamer Legion actually played legit good. And also the problem with these underdog teams is they tend to play scared against, you know, they tend to respect some of these teams too much. And that way, you know, you're too defensive sometimes, you know, you don't want to mess up and so on. And you know, players know how to take advantage of that. So once they started winning some of those rounds in the second half, you didn't see that either from the Gamer Legion side. You know, someone like A-Core was very mobile, very aggressive on the AWP, so aggressive that he screwed up that 2v1 when they could have won the map. I don't know why he jumped on top of Ninja Box, you know, and he knew Robs was coming from the flank, whatever. But yeah, I think for FaZe, obviously they're in a sort of a slump even today. They were 10-5
Yes.
up. They were 5-1 down against Fnatic. They win 9 rounds in a row off of a crazy, you know, round from Brocky in a 1v2 to end it. 10-5, and then they can't just win rounds on T side. Again, I think Fnatic is a good thing. I think they're one of the underrated teams at the moment, and they played good Counter-Strike. But still, you know, FaZe is FaZe. On a good day, it shouldn't be that close. And I did tweet out, the thing about FaZe is that's why they're the best. It's like, even when they're not playing well, they find ways to win games. And that's the most important thing. There's no doubt. A lot of these teams in the top 15, if they're on their A game, they playing the best Counter-Strike they can beat almost anyone on that list. But that happens, well, almost never, really, that you play so good. So I think for FaZe, from what I've been able to tell, I didn't get to actually do a lot of their games. It seems like just individually they're a little bit off. You know, they have this thing where it's like a 4-headed monster with, you know, Robs, Twists, Brocky, and Rain, but no one is really, you know, you never have one of them have a rating for a tournament like you would see from Simple or Zaivu or even Nico when he has a good tournament, or Yakinda or Xerato just now, Xantares, right? It's just they take turns in maps and series, well, probably even in maps. Okay, now Robs has 30 kills or whatever, or not even the amount of kills, but just impactful rounds. Robs has 2 clutches, or Brocky has a couple of crazy rounds with the op, or this is one of the games where Twists or Rain are just killing everyone instantly. One, you know, as soon as they see him, they headshot them. And I feel, if anything, that's been happening just a little bit less, especially for maybe Twists. Just off the top of my head, I didn't even check the stats as much. I might be wrong on that, but that's the general feeling. So I think for FaZe, and we've seen this for this roster ever since its inception, the Drops edition, it's like up and down every now and then. And as long as they make the major, right, it's actually a good thing for FaZe fans, because, you know, Pro League and the road to Rio have been a little bit on the down low. That probably means at the major, they're gonna, you know, peak at the right moment, and no one will care. If FaZe ends up winning this major, wins the Grand Slam at the major, wins both majors, Katowice and Cologne, it's like, I mean, that's insane. That's by far the best year any team has ever had in the history of CSGO, and there's still a couple of more tournaments to be played. So no one will care about, you know, them losing to Cloud9 at Pro League, or, you know, having some close games or whatever.
But I mean, do you feel like it kind of comes about, you know, games like that where is there, you know, they maybe don't prepare enough for a team like that, and then it's kind of like the opposite end where, you know, Gamer Legion know that their first game is going to be FaZe. They're probably already learning from that team anyway. Do you kind of, you know, give that all the attention in the world, or are you going to evenly spread things out, or is it a different philosophy team on team, right? Like, some teams might focus in on some matchups. Some teams might say we need our game to be as good as it can be, and difficult to play against for any opponent, not just FaZe. You know, FaZe isn't going to play the same way as Cloud9 that we might meet a little bit later down, or whatever, right? So I'm just kind of curious as to how some of the backroom mechanics can maybe affect a matchup.
Well, for me, the way, you know, I would look at it, because, you know, you say I used to have the benefit of having like experienced veteran players, good players on my team. I would look at, I would obviously prepare for the opponent, whoever it is, and if I would see some glaring tendencies, even from a lower tier team, I would let my players know about it and say, hey, this is what we're going to exploit, or put something in the game plan specifically for that. But unless it's something really obvious and really easy to exploit, I wouldn't go too much into detail, because I don't want to burden my players with, hey, this is what they do in this round or in that round, when just if we play a default game and I let my players read the game as it goes, these teams, one of the reasons they're in the lower team is because they're easier to read, right? What they're doing, their timing, they may be a bit too slow to execute sometimes, gives you plenty of time to react, figure it out, counter it. And, having the players I had, that's what would happen. And early on, we did have a couple of games when I was still, in MIBR, for example, at the very beginning, I would maybe over-prepare for some of these games because, you want to do everything you can in your power not to lose the game. And then I remember Fallen coming to me and saying, hey, like, I get what you're doing, but you don't need to do all this prep for some of these teams. We got you. We can it's fine. Like, we can figure some of this stuff out as we go. And you don't want to count on someone like Gamer Legion doing something, and if they don't do that, your round suddenly becomes pretty difficult. So yeah, I think Faze without a doubt was preparing like they would for any other game, right? It's just that you prepare differently for a team like Vitality and for a team like Gamer Legion, not because of the amount of time you put in. It's just a different type of how you go about it. You probably do a little bit more of self-scouting, right? And you think about what is it that they will maybe see, what is it that they will try to do to counter us. That was one of the more difficult aspects about the job and about adjusting. There's so much counter-stratting. People try to counter in so many different ways. Sometimes you're not even I've had a couple of games, especially during the online period during COVID. It's I see what the other teams are doing, their reaction, and I'm but why is this their reaction? In the first 10 seconds of the round, they would do something crazy because one thing they saw on a demo, right? So you need to. It's a fine line. That's one of the more important things when you're actually building your game at the beginning, right? A way to be flexible and not have too many tells, right? Of course, you have some set strats that but and that they're could be easy to read when you do them because some of the nades are specific. But the point is, when you call that round, you're counting on calling it in a moment where you're getting a good read, and there's not much they can do about it, even if they know what it is, right? They just have to concede the round. So yes, I think for a lot of these teams, tier 1 teams, contender championship level teams, self-scouting is a big part of their approach and their preparation, opposed to looking at some glaring weaknesses. Because take this for example, right? I probably watch 4 or 5 last maps of a team if they're relevant, if we're gonna play them on that map. But you watch someone like Vitality or Big, who are prone to counter-stratting a lot, right? So what am I really watching? I'm watching their game against this team, and their game changes compared to who they play against. So I might actually be getting, bad information and might be hurting potentially my team more by telling them these are the tendencies. Oh, they love to go long. Well, they love to go long against, I don't know, Vitality, because Vitality had RPK on long, and that was the weak link. And every big round they would, mid to late round probably split A or try to do something like that. Against us, where we have Cold playing long, for example, we didn't. But let's just say hypothetically, right? Well, they're probably gonna try to go somewhere else, or whatever. So you need to look at that as well when you're preparing and think about, you learn teams as you play them. Like Vitality loves to counter strat, and they always pick your weakness in the map pool as well, and they are willing to. One time they did a really good thing where it's I watched last 5-6 Dust 2s, right? And they never, first gun round, they never play 3B a CT. And I say, no matter what happens, we're going B on Dust 2. We're going some sort of a B split late. We'll take Cat, and they play 3B from the start. I'm so these guys are just, they own me this time around. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So yeah, I don't think someone like Faze or someone like Kerrigan especially Robin would allow themselves to, take something for granted, especially also after their tournament in Pro League where they weren't dominant. So, you're probably going to even do some extra work just to make sure you have, plan C, D, and so on if things aren't really working out.
Following up on an earlier point that you had, Djanko, I want to prepare everybody watching for some weapons grade Faze copium, because that's what I'm bringing to the table in this segment. Okay, so I have every confidence that Faze will be a contender team when they enter into playoffs of the Rio Major. That's how confident I am. I know it sounds crazy to say the number one team in the world might make playoffs at the Major, but really think about all of the mitigating factors here. Djanko already referenced earlier, hey, these teams, they busted the veto and now they're on Mirage against this scrappy, not really a mixed team, but it might as well be a mixed team. And it's just a crazy amount of variance that you've left yourself. That's like, when your best map is Dust 2, it's like only barely better than a 50-50 against some teams. So okay, you screw up the veto, now here you are, and you're in quadruple overtime or whatever it is, but you still get the win out. So that's copium number one. They still got the win. And like Djanko said earlier as well, they're ramping up in time for the major. Perfect. Kerrigan said he only cares about majors, Cologne, Katowice. Well, if those are the 4 tournaments they win, is anybody going to be complaining? That's another point that Djanko made. Here's some original points. Obviously, if you think about their run at EPL and how maybe they were faltering a bit and G2 looked better in their group and yada yada, and then obviously they get taken down by Cloud9 and they drop a map to Complexity, all things that Scriv was mentioning earlier. Well, actually, all of those matches were not on a stage in front of like a large crowd. These guys were sort of restricted in terms of how alive they could feel in the game. We know that these guys are LAN masters. These guys are like arena players in many respects. So realistically speaking, if they can still have impressive finishes, if they can still squeak out and edge out these wins because they are the most clutch team in history that I've seen at the very least, that's pretty impressive in and of itself. Then they can get to their own home turf where I don't even know if it's going to get close in some of these arena matches, right? Especially with how, pumped the Brazilian crowd is going to be. I expect that all the noise, all the hubbub, you're going to be seeing like primo Faze. It's going to be exactly what you want to see at that point. And also, I mean, let's be real. Like, not only is this the most clutch team, and not only is this like really the creme de la creme of the arena teams that we have in Counter-Strike, like this roster has just been jet lagged or whatever. It's not really jet lagged, but just constantly overworked with all of the matches that they played at EPL. Now they're straight into RMR against, frankly, nobodies. They're managing to make it through. Now they're 2-0. They look great. Like, is anybody going to remember that they were in OT, that they almost dropped to both of these rosters, that they had to make comebacks and squeak out edges, wins? I mean, they might go 3-0 for all we know. Like, and here we are talking about, like, will they really make it through? Now, I think all of those points, they can be great if you're one of the Faze players, and you could think to yourself, well, actually, I'm an arena player, and all these matches are on studio environments with no crowd, and we're up against nobodies who can anti-strat us and counter-strat us. Admittedly, like what Djanko was saying earlier, I don't know how you really coach somebody in that situation, though. That's the main thing that I'm curious about is, like, what would you even say? Just play your game? Maybe don't mess up the veto so you're not on Mirage? Like, what can you really say to players in those situations where you are going up against a bunch of nobodies? You have been playing a bunch of EPL matches. You have been playing all of these other things. Like, now you're here, and it's still not really the arena, but it's still an important match that you have to psych yourself up for, even though it's just going to play out like 1,000 other matches that you've played in your history. I don't know how you, like, I don't know what you would say to, like, give the rising speech and have them, like, pop off in the end, or even prepare them tactically or whatever. Like, that's pretty confusing, and especially in the age of the counter strat that obviously you guys were just talking about earlier, it seems like a tough gamble. So, I mean, I still think they're going to go. I don't know if they'll go 3-0. I haven't even checked to see who their matchup is yet. I'm not even sure if it's available yet, but it'll be interesting to see. Maybe there's a rematch potential against Cloud9. I think they're both 2-0 in the group, so that could happen. That could be spicy. But yeah, who knows? I just think Faze, people counting out Faze or slumping on Faze and saying, I don't even know who you would take as number one over them. Like, obviously, the TV rankings say they're number one. But Na'Vi don't look that hot either. And now you're talking about, Vitality maybe would be, I don't think they're number one team, though. Like, they're number 3 on the ranking now. Maybe Cloud9 would be a contender. Thankfully, the floor is open for a lot of teams in the major, but I don't know if I would say Faze is, like, not the favorite. People will count them out because of recent, very, very recent form, but I still think they might actually be the favorite. What do you guys think?
Well,
it's tough. It's a tough question. I don't know. It's hard because it's going to be a very different crowd as well. I think, if you want to bring that aspect in, where it could depend on who they're playing, the sort of negative aspect might be a lot to deal with if they end up against.
Scrib, I don't think they're going to be playing a
or
Brazilian team in the major, in the finals. I don't. Or,
not
or
in the
whatever.
final. Yeah, not in the final.
The playoffs.
There might be like a.
Will there be a
quarterfinal.
single Brazilian team? There's the question for you. Will there be a
Fury
single
is
Brazilian?
like Fury is,
They just lost to Evil Geniuses.
I
cut,
guess.
Cut. There's no shot, dude. I don't think there's a single Brazilian team.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that it's a bit of a cop-out answer, isn't it? But for me, there's probably them, Vitality, G2, and maybe Cloud9, I think, as well. I'd say those
Contender
four. Those four, I
teams?
think, are.
No, you're not taking Navi as a contender.
I
was
so.
saying they're definitely not number one, but
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Like, they'll make playoffs for sure. You would presume, but they looked worse, and they looked kind of dejected and out of it. Whereas I guess you could say FaZe were beaten, whereas Na'Vi looked like they were a bit of a shadow of themselves type deal. If that makes sense, right? Like FaZe got outplayed by some very informed, good-looking, Cloud9 squad.
some strapping young lads.
Yes, indeed. They only lost the one as well, right? In the group stage, if I remember, which I always say those group stages with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because it's the same sort of thing that we're talking about here with, some teams that they're maybe not as familiar with, and et cetera, et cetera. Games back to back. You have a few scenarios depending on how well you do early on, but I'm trying to remember now. They were actually under threat. I think FaZe were actually under threat on that final day if they didn't win against Big. So
They must have
gone
win against
3-2.
Big, and then still something else had to do.
Yeah, they must have gone 3-2 for a situation like that. But Na'Vi, got in on like round difference and winning a map against NIP and stuff. So yeah, I'm not as confident in Na'Vi. I feel like for me, I don't know. I feel like maybe Cloud9 could do it. Again, it's just another hurdle that they've got to get over, though, where this team is as yet fully proven, fully championship potential, right? They've come close, but they, and all that. They won Dallas, right? So that I guess is fair, but that was one of your in the middle kind of tournaments in terms of the invitees and whatnot.
All the pullouts, like even Heroic
sure.
couldn't go and all this other stuff. So
yeah, and it was kind of more like Ence doing a little bit more of the upsetting, let's say, in that tournament, and Cloud9 doing as expected, I suppose. But yeah, so I feel like FaZe, it's so hard to say who the favorite is going into this one, which is very cool because the last major we had like quite a clear divide, and it was just between
it was like
two
FaZe,
teams.
Na'Vi, and then everybody else was beneath them, by a pretty considerable margin.
I don't know. I'd probably say for my money, I'd maybe say G2. I think would be my punt to take.
You want to take G2 to win the major? Okay.
Oh, you got baited too. No, I think it has to be FaZe, right? It's FaZe until they're not anymore. And
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
So hard to count them out.
Na'Vi up there as well, and maybe you could add Vitality to the list. I've given up on Cloud9 because they will beat FaZe and then they will lose to Team Liquid.
Yeah.
The whole team somehow. Like the tournament was open for them to take the whole thing, and they botched it. So I'm giving up on them. And if they fail if they, let's say, not make the playoffs of the major, you have to look at making changes in that team. And you probably, I don't know, where do you really look? I guess you only have and can have to look at Nafani and see, like, because Inters is executing his role extremely well. Exile, Shiro, they're playing really well. Hobbit, I don't think you can really change him either. Like, he's the one veteran on that team. So I think that's something that you would have to see happen, because it's been way too long that they haven't gone to the next level, right? Like, you had Dallas, great. Now they make the leap, the jump. They made the next step. Then they go to the Cologne and they lose to Astralis and Liquid, with their first event with Yakindar. It's like, come on, man. And they lost both games 2-0, I think, as well. Right? It's like, what is going on? And Shiro and Exile, the whole event, they're top 5 in terms of rating. So
yeah,
what's going on here, guys? How is this how is this happening? So I given up on them. G2, I don't think they're ready yet to be a contender there. Obviously, if things like click for them like they did in that Na'Vi series, they can. like have a run, and it can be one of those miracle runs, but I don't think they will have spent enough time with this five. You saw even today, like towards the end of the game, they have a 5v3 against Cloud9. They screw it up, like, and there's still, you can see rounds where you can see the idea from Hooksy, and it makes sense what they're trying to do at what time. Like, it was conditioned before by some other rounds, but the players are just, it still looks a little bit awkward when it's being executed. Like, it's still not natural for the players to play that way, right? They're still gonna need reps doing that, and that's when it's going to be much better. I said this, like, I don't think, chances are slim that G2 will win something this year. They can, they just need to have that one, like, kind of run.
Yeah.
But if you want to, you'll have to wait for next year to see G2 be a legit contender, if they can be with this lineup. And I don't see why they can't, because we've seen how good they can play when they're actually playing well. So outside of those teams, someone like Heroic, they didn't give us any reason to consider them a contender anymore. And yeah, I would only put Vitality there because they have a lot of guys who've played in big games before, right? Pretty much everyone except Spinks, and he's very talented, and even if he kind of plays a little bit worse in some of those big games, that's probably when someone like Magus can Dupree are going to step up and make up for some of those numbers. And having someone like Zywood in the form that he's been at, especially at Pro League, if he can replicate that, then they're for sure a solid contender. And that's about it. I don't see any other teams really being in a position to contend for the trophy. There's plenty of teams who might ruin someone else's chance of lifting the trophy. Potentially even someone like Liquid, someone like Outsiders, Heroic, on a good day, they can beat one of these teams, right? Like, it can be one of those crazy things, but I don't think they will have the quality or the consistency to beat, two teams like that in a row and lift the trophy or make it to the grand final or anything along those lines. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting for sure. If I were Faze right after this RMR, I would give everyone, like, preferably a week off, but that would be too long. But let's say 5 days, of no CS, team CS, preferably play individually a little bit, so it's not like you don't touch anything, and then go into a boot camp like before the major and go to the major, depending in which phase they start. That's why they would benefit greatly from booking a legend spot to get that extra week or so, 8 days, right? Then you can give them a week off and play a couple of days online. Obviously, the coaching game where you have to worry during that period, come up with some new stuff. Then online, you just go through these new things a little bit, and then you go into like a week or 8 or 10 day boot camp where you're really doing your best work, right? With some of these veteran players, that's when you get them fully focused in and everyone's together. They have the camaraderie, everyone's playing CS 24/7, and then you come to the event and you're sick.
We would hope, right? I mean, that's the other thing too to think about is I know you just said earlier you're not like, you're giving up on Cloud9, you're not as much of a like on the board of G2 either. You said Scriv got baited when he put them up. I know you also are not massively behind the Ence project currently, and that's something I wanted to pick your brains about because we actually had Snappy on the show a little bit ago, and he was talking about the moves and like all the things that he wanted to do, and some of the things that he was talking about was like how communication is going to be their first, like one of their main ports of call, and obviously adapting the different roles and stuff. The fact that Spinks is out, that's going to be a big deal. And Snappy wanted to move him into more of a star role. How's that going to change the complexion of the team? But I think even before details were released about what they were going to do, or maybe even like I'm not sure if you made this comment when the roster had already been finalized or not, but on that Talking Counter show that you guys do, I remember hearing you say that you just weren't really you weren't blown away by the roster moves and the roster in general. And I think maybe even, correct me if I'm wrong, you weren't super sold on the roster before the Spinks and Hades changes. Is that true as well?
Yeah, that's correct. Listen, first of all, I think Ence did an amazing job as an org with the team that they built and how the team has, and the way in which the team played Counter-Strike, because they sort of had to. I always tend to say, you want to be a contender team, you have to play like 75-80% of your rounds default, right, and then have a couple of set rounds to spice it up. Well, Ence was probably making it like, I don't know, 50-50, let's say, just for the sake of it, right? So they had a lot of rounds, even if they looked defaulty, that were set from start to finish, sort of. And they had to, because of the players they had, they weren't really capable of taking a lot of initiative in the mid round, or maybe getting good reads and playing in a looser way and finding those gaps and taking advantage of them, right? And it was that style that allowed them sometimes, when they're getting the reads, get on a roll and, you know, win some important rounds, win some good games, and have some deep runs. You know, that also required the in-game leader to be fearless and, you know, call fast rounds even if you're down and even if you're losing. And that caught, I think, a lot of people by surprise. And obviously Sphinx was a revelation. Dika had a lot of good games for them, and so on and so on. But to me, always that style seemed unsustainable for them to, you know, go through a whole tournament. Like eventually, they're, you know, the reads are not going to be there, or there's a team is going to show up who's just like much better than them individually, if not anything else, and, you know, they're not going to have as much success in some of those rounds. And I think they were actually, you know, the perception has changed because they had some deep runs, like the Dallas, you know, final with a stand-in, and a couple of, you know, I think Pro League as well. They had a deep run one time, and so on. But, you know, people are talking like, is Ence going to win this tournament? I'm like, well, are you crazy? Like, Ence is not. And I said that before they made any changes. I said they're not going to win a tournament this year. Like this roster, like a tier 1 tournament, when, you know, everyone is in attendance, because, you know, they just don't have the quality for it. That doesn't mean they're a bad team. It's just, you know, they're not that level that you guys think they are. And then when the changes happen, I think Ence dropped the ball, and they're really good with roster changes, but they dropped the ball by not bringing Dexter as soon as he was available. Like, you had to do that at that point in time. And there was only like Cologne left for them, or maybe one other tournament. But it's like, you know, if you're already torn on Hades, like, Dexter is amazing. He's like a game changer for you. Like, he's actually the one piece that you need, right? At that point, that would make me think, okay, down the line, they might even be a contender, right? Because now you have Dexter and Spinks, and Dika was really good, and Madden is pretty good as well in his role. But they didn't do that. They hesitated, I believe, right? And that's one of the reasons. That's what Dexter said. He went to OG because they were just like, we want you now. Like, just come, right? Yeah. And he had the benefit of playing with them as a stand-in in Lisbon, and, you know, Nexa let him do whatever he wanted, and so on. So then, you know, they lose Pinks, they bench Hades, and, you know, the people to replace them are Sun Pius and Valde. I don't know what all the rave is with Sun Pius. Like, you know, like, he's nowhere like a Dexter to me, you know, an upper that you look at and immediately makes you think, yeah, this guy is a game changer. Like, yeah, I think within a system he can do well. You know, I think, you know, people were pointing out most of his work is done on the CT sides. Yes. That's where his best numbers are, right? And then it's like bringing Valde into the team to be the star player. Like, I remember Valde from back in the day. He was pretty good. I have a lot of respect for him. But, you know, I think he probably spent too much time in that supporter sort of a role that's just kind, you know, time has passed them by to some extent, and it might be still early to tell. They just need more time to get, you know, some games in and practice in, and he can do better. But if you ask me, I think you'd be better off giving Madden those roles and putting Valde back into that more of a supportive rifle style. But I think at the moment they're just gonna lack firepower. You know, for me, Sun Pius to Ence is one of those changes that didn't make any sense to me. It's like, you just had the best results with your Spanish team, right? You won Valencia. You were semifinal. They made,
yes,
quarterfinal.
Semifinal of Cologne.
Yeah, you made it to Cologne. Like, you're riding this confidence wave, right, with your comrades, and it's like, yeah, you're gonna go to Ence. Like, I understand it from a move where maybe he gets paid a little bit more, and also you go to an international team, so that in the future opens up a lot more possibilities for you. But listen, from my experience, all of these guys would much rather play in their, you know, own team from their own country. Most of the time, the problem is there's not enough talent, and then you have to go international or whatnot, right? So it's weird that he made that change just when that team was finding success after so long. And it really did feel like one of those changes where he's not going to be better off, and Movistar is also not going to be, like, no one's going to win by that change, basically. So Yeah, it's very strange. I'm willing to give Ence a little bit more time because they are trying to now play a little bit more default, and Sunpies is a big part of that in the mid rounds, giving calls and giving ideas and
Yes.
taking initiative, right? And that's always going to have growing pains when you go for that sort of a switch, right? But we'll see if they're capable of playing that way, if Snap is able to call that way consistently. The jury is still out on that for me. But I think that the change and everything that's happened has definitely made them worse. And even if they adopt this style and it works out, they need upgrades, I think, player-wise, to be, really good.
Yeah,
Get nerds from Endpoint, right? Like, just get another
Oh,
that's
okay.
so true.
there.
Yeah,
Like,
no, that
it's
is
like
very true.
exertions, pinks, nerds, flames, right? Like, these are like 4 sick guys, and then like Shushan or Anarchez, like as the 5th guy, and there you go.
Yeah, Israeli super team.
Yeah.
I see what you're laying down. And
Yeah.
they'll never be able to play in America's event ever. It's over.
Wow.
No visas.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like I think Nerds might be one of the names that was thrown in the hat, but I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure why not. You never really know what their vision
Well,
is, or
also,
business, or
Snap is familiar with Walde from his time.
Sure.
Somewhere, right? So that might have played a part in it, like him seeing firsthand what he's capable of and so on, and just have to wait and see, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that we've talked about a little bit, and I think on that episode, sort of after we, split it in two because Snappy was only available for an hour or whatever, and it feels like Valde is definitely a player that's been riding the wave for a while, and yeah, now maybe doesn't know what he is, as well, is kind of a bit of an undefined kind of role for him. But yeah, it's always going to be
he's not
tough,
the worst
though, right?
fragger, right?
No,
he's not
for
he's not the
sure.
worst fragger, but people have said maybe one of the things he does a lot is call strats out of spawn, right? That's basically what Djanko was saying, is like 50-50 between defaults and set strats and all these other plays. It's like, there's an element where, okay, maybe that's like a placeholder solution that helps you like get acclimatized while your players are learning how to be more self-starting, more take more initiative.
Yeah.
But that never really clicked with those other players. And so now the open question is basically, can this roster do that? Can we get, Sunpius is obviously doing all these comms. When Snappy was on the show, he said like he won't be able to like one of the things that he has to try to instill in Sunpius is like when to take command and when to like take that initiative, because he seems to want to do that all the time. And so that was an interesting angle. It's like the exact opposite, I assume, of Hades. But also, Hades is more streaky, and Sunpius is more. People have drawn analogies to Device, not necessarily in terms of skill, but in terms of the play style. Is like he can just set up a tripwire, and he always hits the shot, and that's what you need. And he's very stable in that sense. So if that's why he did his best work on CT side, I would suppose. And then you go into the T side, and now he's got to start, be more mid roundy, a bit more, bringing more ideas to the table. It's a big change actually, from not just communication, but in terms of like not just language for some of these players, but in terms of what they're actually saying.
It's a similar problem. Like, look at the best teams in the world and the best players in the world. Navi, Simple, Vitality, Zaiwu. Faze, okay, Brocky, that isn't really up to par, but that's why you have like 3 more guys in there, right? That's why it works, and it's the perfect environment for him, where it's not, he doesn't. There's not that necessity for him to put up numbers for them to win, right? All the time, obviously. G2 has Monacy, right? And then you go, Liquid with OC, but it's looking better as time goes by. Cloud9, Shiro, right? Like. And then that's why some of these other teams, like someone for Heroic, for example, it's a problem for them, right? Like Cadian is not on that level as an opera, absolutely. But of course, on the other side, he brings a lot of value in other ways, right, to his team. So without having that sort of an impactful opera, unless you have a really good team around them, or in case of Heroic, a lot of it is like down to team play and Stone being great and the other players not having any weak links, right? It's like you're going to have problems to find success, really.
No, I think it's definitely an interesting one, and Ence kind of, maybe as an organization and a team, to be fair, for me on the bigger picture, maybe speaks to kind of the beauty of where we're at as an esport, and maybe just sort of esports in general, where you can look at certain other, and I always like to draw the comparisons, I suppose, right? But like when we have like the conventional sports, sometimes it's just kind of, if you are a team or whatever with less money, then there's only so far that you can go. But Ence have obviously proven in this past kind of year or so that you can exceed those expectations. You can kind of come up with a unique style, and I think now one of the difficulties is therefore rebuilding that becomes hard, because you can't get a 1-for-1 likeness for if you get rid of Spinks, you can't pull in a player from one of the bigger teams, try and convince them to join you, pay that buyout or whatever, right? So you kind of have to do what you can, but at the same time, it does feel in the past they've been really solid with the scouting, and I think that the future move of some Pius and everything, I think could be really solid. As Pranogo's sort of touching on, he doesn't quite fit with where Ence like to put themselves as a team, the way that we've seen Snappy excel as a caller and whatnot over those sort of 6 months where they look really good. So I kind of do agree with that, but I definitely feel like the move for me again does come back to Valde, and I'm not quite sure where they're going to go with that. The rifling really does need to step up in a big way, and they looked bad. They looked bad, and I kind of hate to say it because I like the team a lot. We had Snappy on here. Madden was one of my first big interviews, and I've got his jersey from the Godsent days. It's like the only one that a player's given me and stuff like that. So I'd love for them to do well, but it seems like they've hit a pretty quick sort of reset button, as it were. I guess that's what you were touching on, Djanko, with like a more default heavy and things like that. And I think that'll see them through the RMR, but we really wanted them to hit the playoffs again, to hit maybe the semi-finals of the major and look really impressive there. And I don't know that they're going to be able to do that. I think it's a much longer term sort of project, and also a project as to whether does it work. Now, again, it's sort of that business aspect, right? I think that they've paid a bit for some Pius, but they've not really paid out any money for the pickup of Valde, right? Obviously, you got to pay him a salary, and I'm sure that he commands a fair one. So we'll see whether they decide to make some moves after the major, or whether they decide to stick with it. But
I mean, it's also who's the star player of that team.
Yeah, no, exactly, right. Like, there's just no.
Right? Who's the best player on that team?
If it's Valde, it has to be a pretty big change,
right?
I mean? Like, he's got to have a renaissance.
It's Diha probably at this
point
in
I guess.
time. It's like who you expect to put up numbers, right? Well, that's a pretty weak candidate, compared to some of the teams that they're going to have to battle against, right? So I think that's their problem. It's going to be like firepower, and they did not, like you lost Spinks, and you didn't, It's like Moneyball. It's not really it's impossible to replace him.
Sure.
But you need to find frags from somewhere else. If they had gotten Dexter and Valde, that would have been much better, right? Like Dexter can make up for Spinks, and then you lose a little bit on the other side of things, and it evens itself out. But I feel like they hadn't done either.
Also, Valde's had so many almost happened, like close encounters where he could have played for Astralis, and now he's signed with Ence, and Konfig gets into a fist fight. It would have been totally fine if Valde was still on the market to replace Konfig.
You also feel like anyone who's gone through the North organization is probably tainted like forever. Just cursed forever. So I would be wary of that as well.
That's
well, I mean, it's definitely true for somebody like MSL, for example. I can't believe he's where he is, right? Also, did I dream this, or is this real? Has he been removed from Titans, or is that like I looked this up? He was?
Yeah,
he's gone? From his own project again? Like, what? How is this possible? This guy really does just get owned every time he steps into a new lineup. And that doesn't happen too often, guys. I don't know if you've been keeping track, but he's not stepping into too many new lineups.
Yeah.
Well,
God.
I know now. I check on HLTV, and he's still on there. But I saw someone tweet or something like with their roster, and it was someone else instead of him, and said that this is a pretty sick roster, not gonna lie. So maybe that was just bait on Twitter that's
what I remember too. Well, he wasn't playing in the latest match they had. He didn't play, so maybe that's what they're talking about. At least according to HLTV.
Yeah, it's a bit weird for the teams that are all the way down there at this point. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
don't
they said
think
his
that
last match with the
HLTV will
roster.
even know.
They have Cynics instead of him, I guess. That seems to be what's happened. So I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, but
what's
he's
going
still
on with
listed,
that
right? I think is what you're getting at.
He's
still...
listed on the lineup, but he hasn't played in the last 3 matches that they had, and they won all the last 3 matches.
Yeah, and it seems as well. Just kind of checking through. It seems actually they have swapped. So Cynics, and then it was Bibu in there.
Shut up. That's an actual player name?
Yeah, that is an actual player name. He's currently on NASA, but which is like the Middle East.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
Agency.
unlucky, mate. Unlucky for MSL.
Yeah, perpetually unlucky.
Yeah. I don't know.
I used to think that like when you named yourself something really silly that sounds at least to Westerners, then there's no shot that you get anywhere. But then we did have Plopsky for a while, so I guess
I have to link you something from the NBA or from a basketball game like after where you won't believe how guys actually called. And the casting moment from that same game.
Is it like I have to say this very carefully? Is it like Nigma Galaxy or
No, it's actually way funnier, but not something that will end your career.
Okay,
right.
cool.
Okay, cool. Yeah, fair enough.
Great.
I don't know. There's a lot of that though. Definitely, like, you know, the less said about North in the end, the better. But it's true, isn't it? Right? Because like Kiebe's, you know, out and then in and then maybe out again.
I can't describe that. At the time, I was still talent before I went to coaching, and there was just something so satisfying in watching them fail. I don't know if this makes me a horrible person or what, but you knew like the amount of money that was being invested. And they had these great facilities, and everything was great, and even the team made sense. And they're putting
weekly
in the
massages.
Hours. They're practicing, like, you know, like they're doing all the things. And then they go to a star ladder tournament to kind of get warmed up, and they lose to some no-namers, and they're like last in the tournament. Like it was actually comical at some point to which teams they somehow managed to lose. It felt like you actually need to try to lose against these teams. Like if you just showed up on the server and just ran around and did whatever, especially in 2017, 5 years ago, the way Counter-Strike was, it's like they would be better off. So it was just unbelievable levels of failure, that it's going to take a while for that to be matched.
Yeah. And then, of course, the farewell video, which is also a classic, where they just set the boat on fire or whatever in like an
video. There was his coach or something.
And then also coach. Yeah, it was a coach. It was like, what?
It seemed like he died. That's what the video looked like. Meanwhile, he had to quote Artian or something and be like, I am still alive and I will be interested in other offers. I have not been.
It was one of those,
wasn't
it?
Viking funeral.
It's like sort of the step down from, learning that you've been kicked from a team in a Twitter announcement. I think it was maybe like they knew what was going on. The team knew what was going on, but everyone watching that video is just like, what does this mean? Like,
rest in peace. Oh, wait, he's actually still alive.
Yeah. Oh, he's all good. And it's actually North that is gone, But
it is. North is gone. Crab noise.
Oh god. Look, let's move on a little bit. We've got a bit more time here, I think, to just sort of touch on the tail end. The RMR, as we're recording, is still ongoing. It has been for well, I suppose you could say a couple days. There is a game that is yet to finish as yet, Navi Mouse, but basically we're all wrapped up on day 2. Starting to get into the BO3s, moving into tomorrow. Just sort of a quick, we love pulling the format conversation out, right? Like, is this the way to do it? I think there's 32 teams in EU, right? So there's an awful lot, let's say. Couple best of ones to open up, and then you get into best of 3s when it's all about, qualification and knockouts and things like that. I don't know. I think that it's nice to get best of 3s everywhere, but the BO1 is not as bad as it used to be in terms of, ups. We have had a few, like, just teams getting shat on, I suppose, So there is still an element of it.
I think, like, I haven't had the time yet to kind of figure it out, but something just feels very off with how we're doing this.
Sure.
Obviously, I hate the best ones in any sort of shape or form, but also I hate the Swiss system too, man. I hate it. I've been hating the Swiss forever because it's like we can seed these teams decently
Between
well,
rounds,
majority of them, right? It's like Swiss is for 64 teams. I don't know, in China that no one ever heard about. There you go, and I'll play. Like Swiss is for large pools of players where you can't see them properly. So they see themselves by, oh, you guys won and you won, oh, you're pretty good. You play each other, right? And you guys lost, and so we end up having like some very weird pairings or actually very weird paths for some of these teams, right? To come and qualify and go all the way, right? Ence played Heat and Falcons, and they might end up playing like outsiders or big. I mean, I don't know who's in which group. I'm just looking at like the upsets and everything.
No, that would be correct.
By
They could
heart.
play either of those two teams.
Right? And then you're at the major, right? And you're the legend. Someone like Ence or someone like Big. Do you guys consider them a top 8 team in the world? Like, not really. I mean,
no.
or whatever. Maybe they can be there, but you get my point. So I feel like whether the problem is there's a lot of teams as well in this thing. Like there's 32 teams in Europe. I was thinking about it. I think the way to go is something along the lines of top 4 teams from the last major are guaranteed a spot. Then you have like the next 4 that from 4th to 8th, they get some sort of also like I still think we should take something into account from the previous major. Like, why are we seeing Faze have to qualify again for the major?
Yeah,
they won the whole thing. They didn't change anything, right? Or Navi for that matter, right? Like, and maybe you could add something in where if it's the same 5-man roster, that's it. They have the spot. And then if you change stuff, even one player and so on, like you add some point system or something along those lines, because I feel this is like pretty ridiculous to have all these teams cramped up together. And then you add best of ones to that, and how you see them coming into the tournament as well might be different. And then all of a sudden, you have like in 1-2 bracket, you have, I don't know, G2 and Vitality potentially, right? Again, which is something that no one really wants to see. So it probably would have to be a change of format. You would have to sort of have, even now, I mean, we have A, B, and C stream are all just for Europe. So, you're already using like 3 games at the same time, and it's still kind of rough. So maybe add a day or two, make it best of 3s, play, run 3 streams the whole time. Like, I'm not 100% sure, but to me, it just feels a little bit off how we do the RMR, and even at the major itself. I mean, the fact that we have best of ones, it's a blasphemy, right? Like,
oh, you're talking about in the early stage, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just also the thing is like you can say, okay, a team still needs to win a best of 3 to go through, right? But
or to leave, or to get kicked out.
Yeah, but still, eventually they're going to be in a position where they play a weaker team because they were 2-0 to begin with, or just by beating a good team in a best of 1, there's a higher chance of good teams meeting in an elimination game, even if it's the 2-2 game, right at the very end. So I feel like ever since the RMR was introduced and we had it this last couple of majors, like there were just a couple of scenarios here and there where things felt a little bit off. I don't know. And then again, when I did the pick'ems for this last major, it was like easy to pick out, for me at the very least, 8 teams. I'm not saying this because I think I'm a genius, but because I think it was pretty straightforward. And most of the favorites made it regardless, right? I guess G2 and Vitality, for what people thought, they didn't make it, but whatever. So I think we need to have a way where maybe some of the spots are left for the teams who did great at the previous major, right? And or some sort of a ranking system. I feel like the way to go is if some spots are filled already, then you don't need a 32 team Europe RMR, right? Like it can be obviously less teams, which then makes it easier to create a more normal format. With 16 teams, I mean, what else can you do besides Swiss or run like a GSL with 4 groups of 4, which we've gone away from a long time ago, and I'm not exactly sure why. The system is perfectly fine. or just do what ESL does sort of for their Katowice and Cologne tournaments, right? And just run a bracket of that source and find teams for that. But yeah, I'm going to have to put some time in after this event is over or after the major is over, just kind of figure something out. Well, actually before the major, so then can bother Valve at the major and be like, hey guys, what you think about this? Because the problem is also you added, the schedule is pretty cramped. Now that might be better with this new way the seasons are being, with the new player break. But you know, you don't want to have the RMR right after a big tournament. Like you don't want Liquid to travel on a Monday after playing the final until like midnight or 1 a.m. and then travel to a different country, then have to go into media the next day and set up, and then play like the most important games. Or even someone for, let's say Cloud9 was in Group D, so they played Group D straight into the playoffs, straight into the RMR. Yes. You have no time to sort of refresh things, right? Which I'm sure, you know, it all depends. Yeah, but they've been in competitive mode for, 2 weeks now, and that's the better. And also, that's another advantage for the teams that played Pro League. They've been to Malta, they've been in that environment, they've been at the same hotel, same venue, just the backdrop change. It says Road to Rio instead of ESL Pro League, right? But these teams are coming from wherever they're coming from. That's their first time being there, right? So I feel like that's also the familiarity gives some of these teams that were there already, a little bit of an advantage, and so on. And obviously, with the other tournaments that are coming in, that was the only time you could do it, and for the fact so that teams have times to get visas, the ones who need them to get to Brazil. So yeah, I feel like our major circuit right now needs fixing. First step is major needs to be the last event of the season. That's it.
Yeah.
Everything else is just ridiculous, and I don't even want to go into this. Just change it, like, for the love of God and everyone involved, and it will make things much easier for everyone, right? And yeah.
I'm still kind of shocked that the TOs, I guess I shouldn't be shocked. I am still shocked though, despite the fact that it's kind of common sense. Of course they would do this, that all the TOs are like trying to get the one up each other for the last event of the year, where I think last year we had like an ESL event and a Blast event like in the last couple weeks of December. It's like, hello? Actually, Djanko, I think you were the one who sort of brought attention to this, but there's a different date that certain people celebrate Christmas on, and it's in January. And at that point, there was like some event that was going on that people were like, "Oh, don't worry, we got this Christmas taken care of, so it's fine." Like that was in
2020. That was when I was in Faze, because obviously me and Nico are Orthodox Christians.
Yes.
So in our calendar, Christmas is on the 7th of January, and that's when ESL scheduled Katowice qualifiers.
Right.
Which is like. Also, why? Well, there's no need for you to do this now. There's like a month and a half until the event, But it was after that people started like, and also G2, they had Hunter and Nexa. They had to play it, I think, as well. So they got the ball rolling on that being changed, and that was from that point on changed. But there's a lot of like weird stuff when it comes to the seasons. I think I talked about this as well. I felt like it was weird when like Katowice was before Pro League. So yeah, this is what I had. I have it all figured out.
Okay.
So you put the major at the end, right? You open up the year with either Blast groups, probably Blast groups into Pro League, into Katowice, right? Something like that. Or if you can't do it all, then you do Pro League into Katowice, into Blast groups, and then the showdown comes soon after, so their storylines tie a little bit better. You play the groups in January, and then you play the finals in June. It's like, like you lose a lot of momentum and everything for the storyline building. And then you do that, and then you have like some IEM in there that's usually, and some of these other tournaments if they want to step in, and tier 2 tournaments and so on. And the very end of it, like, what would it be now? I don't even know. Mid-May, late May, and then June is for the major, right? You go to RMR and the major, and that's it. The problem is now where you put Cologne. But I would, again, at the very least, have either Blast groups or Pro League happen before Cologne happens, because these events, you don't want to have them with teams not being warmed up at all, right? It feels like a waste of an event so big. So I guess what I would do is probably the second half of the year. I love Cologne. I think it's the best event, but I also love the Blast Royal Arena event, which I think is also amazing. So you probably do again Pro League into Cologne, into Blast groups, and then the fall finals are the last big hype event before the major. And then soon after that, you have the problem is these Blast World Finals, which is like it's also they do the fall finals are a Royal Arena event, and then the World Final is like a studio event, which is supposed to be the pinnacle of your whole circuit. It's like just make the World Final the Royal Arena event. Just swap it around. Will the fans will notice if they're attending the fall final or the World Final? I guess potentially there's a higher chance of a Danish team being at the fall final in the world. I don't know. I don't know what the thought process is, but they should definitely like switch that around, and make the fall final and the spring final the two events that are somewhere else, like Lisbon and this and some of these places where they already done events. And then the world final is always in Copenhagen, and you always know when it is, like say almost pretty much same time every year, and that's it, right? Like after that you have a week off, RMRs, 2 weeks off, and the major. That's the problem as well. Like where you hold the major, teams need visas. You don't know who's going to attend. Why you don't know? Because you don't know a single team who's going to be at the major before the RMR is over. Again, having some teams be there before, right? Like, I also don't know. I was thinking 24 teams is a ridiculous amount of teams to hold a tournament. Like, that's why Pro League has 4 groups of 6 round robin. It's like, why is every bracket 16 or 32 teams? Because that's how it's easiest to create a fucking bracket. Like, like, why don't we... You either go all out for a major and have 32 teams, and then the qualifiers are like, there's a lot more places that are set at the tournament, and then some of the qualifiers are even fucking online, for some of those spots. If it's going to be 32 teams, then fuck it. Or you put it 16 teams, and then, you have like the RMR for less spots, and you just hold a 16-team tournament also over 2 weeks, but then you have only best of 3s, and you have a really good format. And I think actually now that I'm talking about it, that's probably the way to go in a way, even though it sucks because we have a lot of good teams now, right? But, fuck it. Like, I think for me a little bit, well, the World Cup in football was always fun because you have a chance to see your national team, and there's a lot of teams there. But I don't know, they just keep adding the number of teams. At some point it kind of, especially for example for basketball, it's getting ridiculous. Like the European Championship, there's so many teams. I didn't know some of these countries played basketball. I don't know a single player for their country. It's like, what are we doing here? They're losing games by 40 points, right? Like, where's the value in that for anyone involved? So yeah, I think it might be something like that. Just go back to 16 teams, but make it insane. Make it like really good format. Like give time for content and whatnot. Make it best of 3s. Like then make the stage. I love what TSL is doing with Rio. I think I've been telling them they should need to do this with Katowice, with Cologne. We need to have viewers for games outside the playoffs, because there's insane Counter-Strike being played and insane matchups that are being played, with no one watching it in like the sort of studio environment. I think that's a waste. I think this is perfect what they have with like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people, right? And I know that's not always easy to set, but even doing it, in Katowice, like they did before for the major in the expo area, with like 500 people being able to watch and just having a sort of a different stage for some select games. I think that's like the way to go, right? Like there's a lot on the line for some of these games, and you don't have that feel, even if you're playing those games, and if you're watching them, if you're casting them even, right? So I think there's those improvements like in different areas that can be made. I just realized I went on a rant, but yeah.
No, that's fine.
No, it's all good.
Djanko Unchained over
Indeed, mate.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. No, I do think piggybacking off of the point about the crowd. I remember in the I think it was the Stockholm major qualifier, there was a match between Outsiders and Saw, and that was a match that was like, it was do or die. Yeah. It was Antwerp. Okay. And so in this qualifier, there's like this amazingly hype moment on Inferno B site where like barely by the skin of his teeth, James manages to clutch it out against or maybe it wasn't James. I know it was the opposite Saw.
It was Jame.
It was Jame. Okay.
Jame versus Stadodo, yeah.
Stadodo, yeah. So Stadodo is coming in looking hot, trying to clutch it out, just barely fails. And that in that particular situation, I remember thinking like, dude, that could have been like a game that you could have watched in a crowd and like have the amazing pop-off moment. And so, I mean, that's obviously that's an RMR game. That's not even like a challenger stage game. So it would be really nice to get some more crowd play. I think the limited amount that we saw in EPL, it didn't really do it for me, but it's a step in the right direction where like at least we have something. Obviously the playoffs of that event, well, I guess the event all in general, the broadcast delays and stuff or whatever is affecting the viewer experience, but the end result of at least having people in there is closer to what I wanted. It's closer to what I want, where I want way more like arena Counter-Strike. I want way more crowd, crowds in a match or whatever. I think that's where you see like you really get to start to separate the wheat from the chaff, the boys from the men, and you get to see like who can handle that kind of pressure. And so anything that gives us more of that is a win in my book. And so I'm definitely hyped for seeing more of that, even on some of these like earlier matches where you might make an argument, oh, it doesn't matter as much, but I want to see, way more teams go through the crucible of the crowd in that sense. I want to see, like, I remember before COVID, we had so there was a DreamHack event that Gen G of all teams managed to take, and in that case, it's like, yeah, these guys went to this land. There was a crowd there, and it was more sizable even than like the Fragadelphia that just went down recently. It's like if you get a lot of people to even the tier 2 teams to get some LAN with crowd experience, that's going to be invaluable once they get onto stage against these tier 1 teams. That's going to maybe fast track them up the sort of pressure valve or whatever to get up to tier 1. So that would have been really nice if we just had a lot more of that. Obviously, COVID made that go way down, but it would be really cool if we could get back up to like more and more events doing that. So I see that as a great move in general.
Yeah, I feel like as well to just sort of touch on the format thing alongside that a little bit. I think it gives a lot more prestige to the events and kind of legitimizes some of these games. And indeed, it'll probably get more people watching. I would imagine that if there is that sort of hype and all that, even just online, you'll want to feel the atmosphere as though you're there, kind of thing. That's a really, really big aspect of especially football in England and all that sort of stuff. You go to a game of a team that maybe you don't know, maybe you have no idea, but you're there for the experience, right? And I think that some of those earlier games in tournaments sometimes don't give the full experience. We're just going through the rigmarole of playing the game because it has to be obviously played to further the tournament and the bracket and all that sort of stuff. In terms of the format, though, I do kind of like. I think that we are with the major. We're somewhere in the middle where it's like, some teams qualify that you don't expect. Very cool. They maybe then go on to not perform very well. Sometimes you get a Copenhagen Flames who seemingly get the major buff or whatever and look really, really good. In that, again, atmosphere, I suppose. But I do like the idea that you're maybe touching on a little bit, Djanko, where like, we either need all the teams, all the possibilities and whatnot that we can feasibly get without it being ridiculous, to allow, some of these upset storylines to happen and things like that. Or it does need to be, you get to the major and it's kind of the least amount of teams in a way that we can go towards, because then again, we'll add to the prestige of the major and the difficulty of qualifying there. And, you come in as an underdog, but it's daunting. And imagine if the storyline's even bigger if you manage to pull off some wins and pull off some upsets and make it to a playoff that you never should have made. But yeah, I definitely feel like the big one with the way that obviously things took a turn during COVID and they rehashed the whole format. We were playing major qualifiers for a major that never happened, so they did also have to work all that out. But I think that now we can, again, maybe hit a little bit of a reset button and not necessarily make it fully points-based or whatever. Look towards giving some reward for teams that perform well. Even if it is just the finalists or whatever, I get that, you have to be careful. And it's like, how far through do you want to put them? Do you want to put them in the playoffs? Probably not, because that's overstepping quite a bit. Do you want to just put them in, the sort of second stage where the teams that perform well at the RMR will get put anyway? I feel like, maybe that could be the move. But it certainly does feel like this is a little bit of a deader kind of format for the major, and then for the RMRs as well. Like,
I mean, see, I hate the format of the major because one simple reason: you have a phase that's a part of the major where 8 of the supposedly best teams, you can't play them. It's like, so
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
is that then exactly? How is that the major when you can't meet some of these teams, right? Like it feels a bit strange the way it's set up. I feel like I've had some good points about it. I feel I probably said some ridiculous shit that doesn't make any sense. But I didn't, like, I have to develop some of these ideas and come up with something, right? But I feel like there's a better way out there for us to be doing this, right?
As far as
yeah.
world championships go, right? That's the main thing. We need a format that reflects the prestige of the event and also the idea that it's supposed to be the celebration of Counter-Strike. And those are two things that you have to marry carefully because they're not really the same thing. Like, there's the best Counter-Strike, and then there's, do we want this to be a world championship where everybody is like represented? And that's why you have like slots from NA and slots from like, you know, different slots depending on the region and stuff. And maybe we could easily get into the weeds based on that discussion.
That's a good point. I think that's one of the things that actually is important for Valve is that, you know, obviously all regions are represented and it's a celebration of the game for, you know, the players of it, which are majority casual, right? So representation is important. So yeah, it might be one of those things where 16 teams just isn't enough to accomplish all of that from their side of things, and 32 might be, as of now, too much. So we'll just have to kind of see. Maybe, you know, we give them some ideas, some suggestions, and maybe something gets changed, updated, better. You know, I'm not saying, you know, this is not terrible the way we're doing it. I think most of the time you still get like the best teams there, and, you know, the best teams ends up winning, which is, you know, is that the point of a format, to get the best, you know, the best team to win? We would say yes. Did that happen the last couple of majors? Yes. So is there really anything that's the problem, right? So yeah, it's an interesting discussion, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, if you live as I do and you're always imagining the better thing, then unfortunately a side effect is you're never satisfied with what we got, right? So there is a balance for sure, is like understanding what we do have now and the benefits and how bad it could be. But I do agree with your general philosophy there that there's more that could be done to improve the format. And so hopefully, like you said earlier, when you draft up these plans and you hand them carefully to Valve, they don't just like, oops, lost them and never get back to you. Hopefully some changes.
Share them with Chad. He has a good idea every now and then. Moses maybe as well.
There you go.
Right? We whip something up.
Every now and then, right? Every now and then.
Yeah, that's all you need, I suppose. But yeah, it definitely, just to sort of close out on that, and then probably finish the show here, to be fair, fellas. Sure. I think that it's one of the, you know, for me, there are many pros of like the open circuit and multiple operators and things like that. I think that could indeed, maybe you could argue that this is one of the cons, is that when it comes to this, you know, semi-developer run kind of tournament, it can be a bit tough, I think, for them to find a good way to do it. And then also you've got Valve maybe dictating ultimately what the format is going to be and how it's going to play out and all this sort of stuff. Maybe we give RMRs to separate operators again, maybe not quite far down as they went during, you know, the 2020 RMRs and whatnot, but maybe it is an idea to have a few different ones. And I don't know, but then it goes back to the whole building up the points thing, and you don't get to see these teams, a little bit of a taster of the major, right, as a Gamer Legion or whatever. You never know. If they make it through, they get to play Faze again, they take a map off them, it could be an exciting kind of storyline if they make it into the major. But yeah, I can certainly see and I can certainly feel why it might be a bit harder. They don't have full jurisdiction, and also the big thing is because they're not getting heavily involved in the esport, is sort of the money aspect as well, right? Where if they want to do this big tournament, like, you know, Worlds is going on at the moment, I believe, like coming up soon in League of Legends, it's a lot easier for Riot to kind of fully dictate and you know, kind of manage where it's, because money is ultimately no object in that sense. So if they want to add a few more teams in or whatever, or extend the group stage, then they can, you know, and they don't have tournaments either side, so.
They have way too much focus on Worlds. Like, I don't like their format. I think we have way more important tournaments and tournaments that matter and so on, right? Like, for them, it's you have these splits, right? The leagues where you have obviously teams who are favored and teams who are not very good, and they're like 3 wins. And those are the teams that are there because it's a franchise league.
Yeah.
And then you have worlds that you're, like waiting for to see all the regions actually compete against each other for the first time as well. So there's a lot of hype around it for that reason, also because the most vocal regions, Europe and NA, have never won it or whatever in the last 10 years or whatever it is. It's the Koreans and the Chinese that are the best at that. So it's always like, oh, is this the year? I know G2 got to the finals a year or two ago, right? And that was a big thing, only to get through 3-0, just like in every other game. I don't know if we can say that anymore, that Carlos is not a part of that. Is that even funny or not? Or will we get canceled as well?
Just sad.
Well, to be fair,
sad.
we were always saying, like, hey, okay, it's fine that you're making this a joke, right? But maybe it shouldn't be like a branding thing. Maybe you should actually try winning. That's like a point that Thorin brought up. Well, they did change their brand, and now Carlos is out. So
yeah,
that's not exactly what we meant, though. We wanted them to change the winning part.
So right, then it's like, and then it's also these periods when there's no games, or right. It's like, I feel like they have the opposite problem. We have oversaturation, and they don't have enough going on. I think adding a couple of more tournaments somewhere. I think League definitely has the following to fill massive arenas, right? So figuring something out like that, where we do a couple of more live events, would benefit them. But I don't know if they even have the need for something like that. The game is big on its own, and things are going fine, I'm sure, for Riot.
As long as nobody speaks out of turn, don't bring up the lawsuits, we're good. Everything's fine.
I don't say it's like it's been way too long of a day to get into that.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
That's another episode altogether.
We did a little bit, and it seemed like the spies were out because the algorithm did kill the last episode pretty heavily, I will say. So,
when we were talking about
a certain starchy vegetable. Yeah, indeed.
The whole Carlos.
Yes, absolutely. But nonetheless, I think that's going to do us here, guys. Good show and good chat as always. Thank you very much, Djanko, for coming on, and hopefully we'll get to see a bit more of you perhaps further down the line. And I hope the rest of the RMR is nice and fun for you. But of course, that's going to be it for this episode, folks. We will catch you once again next week with more of the Off Angle.
You're going to love this video right here. You're going to love it. Check it out right now.